Well, here we are, we're back again, and a massive welcome to all of our subscribers, first-time viewers, and of course LinkedIn members to a one-off special where I'm going to be joined by the head of sales for Quokka.io, Ilya Dreytser, for a deep dive into how they protect the mobile ecosystem. After all, we've all got one of these, and protecting our personal data and financial information is crucial, and I think personally getting more and more difficult in the fast changing world that we live in. So before we get any further, a little bit about our guest. Ilya is a senior leader of customer engineering organizations with over 20 plus years of experience in software development, pre-sales engineering, enterprise sales, and post-sales consulting and training. But before we bring him on, and for those new to the channel, I'm your host, Simon Lindstedt, and by sharing stories and best practices over the last few months, we've now hit over 176,000 views here on YouTube by you, our amazing 8,915 subscribers. So thank you so much for that. Quick QR code for you here if you're brave enough to scan it. This is the QR code for our community. And don't forget, in there, we've got regular study groups, mentor sessions, regular networking events to help you raise your game in cybersecurity, no matter what stage you are in your career. So make sure you check out the community if you haven't already, if I point the right way, right here on the screen. If you don't want to scan the QR code, there is a link on the YouTube channel description that you can click through to check that out. And again, if you'd like to support the wider InfoSec Live community, or indeed just buy me a cheeky decaf coffee, we do have a way you can show your appreciation right here on our YouTube channel with 3 tiers of membership, allowing you to show your support in any way that you can. But whether you join or not, being here and engaging with our content is what really matters. So if you're watching this live, please make sure you subscribe. And if you enjoy our content and you want to be notified of the future stuff that we bring out, please ring that bell. Each and every one of these shows gives you, our audience, our live audience, the chance to engage with our guests. So make sure if you've got any questions, you also drop them in the chat. Time for me to stop rambling on, get on with the show. Let's bring Ilya on. Welcome.
Simon, hello. Hi, everybody. 8,915 subscribers and counting.
I think it's 15. I made that bit up, actually. I looked earlier and it was 14, so I should probably double check. But it's still,
I can
it's
be
still not bad.
15. I can be number 15 there.
Brilliant. Love that. Just for a bit of context, Quokka very kindly supported the event we did with Connect.io in Austin, Texas back in January. Ilya and I met then, and we actually even went out to a honky-tonk bar together, didn't we?
We did.
Which was quite exciting.
It was great.
Some very interesting sights and some very good music as well. I think I've fallen in love with Austin a little bit out of all the places I've been to in the States, which isn't that many, only 4 or 5. I did really, really like it there. And I like the keep it weird vibe as well. I think it works. Plus, when we were walking around town, we bumped into Bob Murray as well, which, you know, it's a win for everyone, isn't it? But anyway, me digressing as usual. Do you want to tell our audience, before we dig in, talking about protecting the mobile ecosystem, do you want to just give our audience a bit of background about yourself, Ilya?
Yeah, I would love to. I'll give just a quick 30 seconds on me personally and another 30 seconds on the company
Okay.
because now we are a whole. So my career started out as a software developer working on some military vehicle applications and command and control stuff for the U.S. Army. And then I discovered this wide world of working directly with the customers. And so for the last, about 20 years, I've been in various customer facing roles, running, customer organizations, doing everything to help bring technology into the hands of the people that it helps. And I think my very first experience with this was on meeting a company called Coverity that had a static analysis product for developers, and literally having that aha moment, like, hey, I was just a developer trying to solve this bug for 3 months. And here's a piece of technology that instantly, in a matter of, say, instantly meaning in a matter of an hour, comes up with a solution. And it took me 3 months, to do the same thing. Like, oh, okay, so this stuff exists and it's great. And, let me evangelize it. What's interesting about security and me personally is when you work with selling security products, a lot of time you meet that quintessential developer that says like, oh, my code is great, I don't care about that security BS, which I can relate to because I was a dev that pretty much had that opinion at some point. So it's definitely an opinion, and it's definitely something that I can understand, from that point of view. So now that I'm
And
on the other.
that must help, Ilya, in the conversations that you're having with people, because you can relate to the problems and the challenges that they're facing as well.
I think so. I think the reality is we're all users of software. We buy software, we sell software. And, if you plug yourself into the actual equation and not just treat it as this magic thing that does everything and say, hey, it doesn't do everything, but here's what it does really well. And here's why you should care. Coming from that background has always helped me to relate these things to people. And in terms of Quokka, the company, so this was a company started by a professor and some PhD students about 12 years ago when Apple just released the iPhone 1 and Android was kind of just beginning, with version 1.x. And the concept of having apps going into stores, getting downloaded on a device, and the device is in your pocket and it's got a radio and it's got GPS and it's got all this capability, microphone, camera, right? The U.S. government in the beginning stages was essentially giving out grants to understand what are the risks of these devices. And, risk to a deployed service member is one thing. Risk to, say somebody on the diplomatic staff is another. Then you get into journalists. So there's, there's that level of risk 12 years ago. And that has matured to the point where, hey, we all have one of these, we all carry it. So risks are different, right? Me as a private citizen, I'm concerned about my privacy. My company is concerned about securing our data. So Quokka used to be called Kryptowire. And Kryptowire was put on the map back in 2017, 2018, 2019, when we discovered that TikTok was sending data to China. So we were, Kryptowire was the first one to do that.
Oh,
And
wow.
and so over time, we found some interesting examples. I'd love to, work some of them into the story here today with you, Simon. But, there's a lot of these interesting examples. Part of the reason that we exist is because these mobile phones are in everyone's hands, and people have different level of risk acceptance, let's say, right? You fire up your banking app, you assume it's secure, and it probably is. And so there's that element of trust. And the same can be said about folks in the military, folks in the private sector, folks in the say the medical settings, right? So these things are so prevalent. So Kryptowire renamed to Quokka to really protect the mobile ecosystem. And that means different things to different people. And I'd love to share some of what we've seen.
Love that. And what was the main reason for you joining? Why join Quokka?
Yeah, so I've worked at a few different companies that were focused on mobile. And for a long time, we've been hearing, hey, mobile is coming soon. Mobile is becoming more important. It's always been this sort of second-class citizen to the web, and everything was, we primarily use our computers to get stuff done. And sure, people are starting to roll out mobile apps. And so I've been seeing this progression over the years as mobile has gotten to be, a first-class citizen, and people have really started switching to the point where, people travel with an iPad with a keyboard. We don't even travel with a computer anymore, in some professions. So it's really getting to that point. And so when there was this opportunity to join a company that had a pedigree in academia, that was creating new technologies to really discover this, coupled with the fact that, we're selling to developers and we're trying to convince developers on mobile apps and mobile devices that, hey, this is something you need to care about more. That's what drew me in. Is it's this moving of mobile into the mainstream, and
And
the
it's,
need
I
for
mean, and it
security.
has changed so much just in the last few years. I mean, ironically, my first job when I left school was selling mobile phones, but they were transportables, and I'm aging myself now, where they were about this big and they had a big handle. Um, but how basic they were then to how far things have come, and I mean, the thing that depresses me is wherever you go, everyone's like this. They've affected,
Yeah.
I think, the next generation of social skills a little bit as well, but let's not get digging into that today. But where do you start when it comes to protecting the mobile ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, we look at it in three different parts. The first one is, of course, the device itself, right? There's Apple and there is Android. Apple has a very good security story, with a bit of a dark side because it's all obscured, right? So they do definitely have, good security, but when there is a problem, no one finds out about it potentially
No.
for years. I mean, last at the end of last year, there was a couple of patches that Apple had to rush through because it turns out that there was a 0 day being exploited, and this was in existence for years, like 2 or 3 years. This 0 day was in there, and no one really knew. So we don't know how long it was exploited for, right? But Android has a different problem. They have a lot of different devices. A lot of it is handsets and mobile phones, but also point of sale, kiosk terminals, and handheld units that are used on either airplanes or in the hospitality industry, and check-in kiosks and all sorts of form factors. We have a customer that does smart boards for schools. So there's just so many different devices built on Android. They definitely don't have security through obscurity. It's all there for you to
No.
see, but there's so much of it and it's so exploitable that there's these problems. And so the first thing we do is we look at the actual hardening of the devices themselves. Then we look at mobile apps, right? People are creating mobile apps for controlled ecosystems like healthcare mobile apps, apps connected to IoT devices, apps connected to those standalone kiosks, apps that we're using like banking apps and
Yeah.
finance apps, and apps for trading and apps for bit currency and all sorts of stuff. And then you have the third prong, which is us. We as employees of a company or we as individuals are using these mobile devices and mobile apps. So who's protecting us, right? And so we're focused on the entire ecosystem, and that means different things to different people. But we've been operating this space long enough that we understand some of the dynamics and how they interact. And that's really what we're looking at, is how to protect people from malware, how to protect people from banking scams and other things that are that have real world implications.
And a lot of it is protecting people who don't really know that they need protecting at all, I think, which is the irony behind it, isn't it? You
Yeah.
mentioned Apple. I mean, I'm talking to you now on a MacBook. I've got an iPhone. Yeah, we're sold into Apple. However, a lot of people I know use Android. And when it comes to Android, there isn't just one manufacturer, and there certainly isn't just one type of device. How does that work from a protection point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about it for hours, but to keep it short, it's complicated.
Yeah.
So the first question is actually, well, whose job is it to protect you, right? If you are buying a Samsung phone, is it Samsung that's responsible for protecting you? Well, they're running on Google and they're modifying it. So is it Google's Android that's responsible for it? Is it the individual apps that are going on there? And by the way, apps that you download from the App Store is one thing, and that's the one that most people are familiar with. But Samsung is building and including their own apps in there, and then they're building their image, or anybody, Oppo or Asus or any company out there that's making a phone, they're basically building their own stuff on top of the Android image, and then they're getting things directly from a manufacturer. So somebody is creating the Android firmware, and it's this combination, and it's coming from all different things. So if you think about the traditional question of the supply chain, what are all the elements of the supply chain? Me as an end user, the only thing I know is, well, it's a Google phone, or it's a Samsung phone, or it's a Pixel, or it's an Oppo phone, or a nice gaming phone from Asus. Sure, so that's our entry point. But there are so many people that are involved in that supply chain creating the apps that actually drive the camera, creating the apps that drive the Bluetooth. These are not even apps that you interact with necessarily, and they're all kind of layered on top until you get to the bottom layer, which is the actual Android operating system.
So it's a nightmare, basically. Is that what you're
A
saying?
little bit, a
Yeah.
little bit. And as a regular user, how much of that? So here's an interesting example. Android puts out patches every month, and it's a security patch. What I noticed recently on my phone is Samsung told me to update my phone. I updated my phone, and Samsung says, "Yep, you're up to date. Everything is hunky dory." But then I found out that I was still running the January security patches. And that's a completely separate thing you have to update by going to a completely separate place in settings. And when you go there and it's buried 4 levels deep, and you finally get there and it says, "Oh yes, we do have an update for you. You're actually 2 months out of date. You're 3 months out of date. Would you like to update your security patches?" Yes, I would.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Apple being a single provider makes it easy. There's the Apple version, 17.4, and we all know we need to go get it. And it's very easy to understand that you're in there. But because Android is comprised from all these different folks, you have the Samsung updates, you have the Android updates, the security patches, they're all different. There's not really a singular definition. In fact, you have all these phones, and maybe certain phones only get certain security patches, and then other
Yeah.
phones get different ones. So the question is, as an average person who is using an Android device, where do you think you need to go in order to make sure your phone is up to date?
That's a really good question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Prashant's come out with a comment. I'm just going to bring it up quickly. So that Apple are now required to support third-party app stores, so they can no longer guarantee the security of the phone. I had no idea about that. Is that a recent thing? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So Europe has passed some laws that basically are trying to open up and give fair competition, if you will. In the United States, we're trying. There's actually some activity trying to do that, coming from video game stores that don't want to share their revenue with Apple, that are basically using the legal system to say, well, it's not fair that Apple forces everyone to use their distribution mechanism, right? So Android has had the concept of side-loading apps or putting your own apps on there. There's competing stores like even in the US, we have Amazon having its own Android store. But internationally, right, these are stores that are very common. And so it creates, competition. It also creates a lot of problems, when you have apps that are being sideloaded as a concept that people are comfortable with. That's where you're getting a lot of those malware and Trojans coming on and saying, "Hey, download this app, to get a good deal on Duck." That was in the
Yeah,
news a few months ago, right? Poor
I saw
gentleman
that.
downloads an app to basically get Peking Duck, and it turns out it's just going in and draining his bank account, right? So these are very prevalent in societies where it's common to go and install an app not from the official store, if you will. Not to say the store is perfect. We've definitely seen over 200 examples just last year where things go into the app store, official app store, and then get discovered as being malicious and pulled out of the app store. But these are all problems, and Apple has traditionally not had to deal with that, and now they will. And they're
Yeah.
opening that up in Europe. And I'm sure the rest of the world is soon to follow. And so you have this real problem. It's a
It's
challenge.
a whole can of worms for Apple there, by the sounds of it. There's another couple of questions from Prashant, if you don't mind. I'm just going to bring them up before we move
Of
on to the
course.
next one.
Happy
Um,
to.
this one here, with companies now pushing for bring your own device, what challenges exist when it comes to managing work usage on personal devices? So many is the
So
answer. Is
many. So
it?
I think
Thanks,
I
Prashant.
think I want to highlight three of them. So two of them are relevant to the company or the enterprise, and the third one is essentially a barrier to entry. So first and foremost, when you have bring your own device, and your company says, right, I'm going to install an agent on your device that's going to control it, and it'll let me do things like see all your emails or see all your pictures or see what apps are installed on your device or wipe your device in case you lose it. That's a really big problem.
But
Most
the
people
problem
who
is, I watch my teenage children, not so much the 18-year-old because he works in cybersecurity, but the
right.
15-year-old, they never read that, accept, 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 accept. And we're all a little bit guilty of that. I'm blaming my children, but I've probably done it myself. You never, who
As have
reads
I.
all that stuff? And you then look on the settings of your iPhone and see how many apps are actually accessing all of your data, and it's horrendous. It's horrifying.
Yeah. It is, and look, it's the reality of doing business. If my company is going to issue me a phone and they control it, that makes sense. But if I'm coming in with my phone that has my kid pictures on it, and you're telling me that you're going to basically have the ability to wipe the phone, even if you never use it, just the fact that it exists is a problem for me. So you have that kind of big brother watching over you and telling you what to do thing. And people are not willing to accept that on their own devices. Like you said, if they know about it, if they read about it. But in the enterprise setting, the enterprise, if I'm agreeing to use my phone for work, I'm doing work on it. I have emails with work information. I have
Yeah,
potentially PDF documents or other things that I'm storing on there, or things that I'm using, like my credentials and other things. So that creates these other two elements, which is, one is my privacy, right? Like, I don't want to necessarily let my employer deal with this stuff or have visibility into it, but I also don't want some threat actor to come in to my phone, because I'm in a coffee shop, for example, and get access to something or just mess with it, right? So there's that element. So should my employer protect me from somebody else being able to grab my credentials, because that's not something I want, but that's also not something my employer wants. But then the other thing is, if you have apps that do contain malware or that are doing malicious things, even if it's not through malware, right? Is there a way to detect that and protect me from it without infringing on my privacy? And the answer is yes. There are solutions that are able to find both these 0 days unknown issues, the malicious stuff that's not yet discovered. That's what we do. And then
yeah.
also do it in a way that doesn't impact the end user privacy. So yeah, that's the thing. In order to enable BYOD, an enterprise has to have some semblance that, hey, these devices are going to be secure. We talked about Android devices themselves being secured. We talked about the apps being secured. Now we're talking about, the apps that are leaking my credentials, or, those PDFs that happen to have company secrets, right? So you need to protect all that, but you also need to balance my desire to not have my company have the ability to, wipe my phone or to identify issues with it. And that's
Well,
that's
it's
what's
right.
really.
And another comment there, another issue with corporates installing apps on bring your own devices is the perceived or alleged snooping on during out of hours usage on one's own personal device. And I don't know if is that something that you've come across, or is that Prashant being paranoid, wearing his tinfoil hat, sitting at home?
It's
Prashant, if I've
really
seen
not.
you.
Yeah, it's really not. It works both ways, in fact, right? So we as users, I mean, this is something we run into all the time, where we've heard from users, especially, tech savvy or people in the tech industry, that say, hey, there's no way I'm putting this on my phone, because I have concerns. But the flip side is true as well, right? If an IT organization has the ability to do, to see pictures on your phone, for example, even if they never actually purposely go and look, it's
They
a
still can.
liability for them. So
Yeah.
if something comes out that you had a picture on your phone and they should have notified the authorities and didn't, the fact that they had access to it is now putting them on the hook
Oh my
legally to
goodness.
say, you could have looked at all these pictures, found the bad one, and notified somebody. You didn't. So are you liable now? So it's like a double-edged sword, right? We want to protect our privacy. An IT department wants to protect themselves from liability. They don't want to have access to our pictures. If there's a way to do this and secure the device and secure the apps on the device and ultimately secure the user in whose hand the device is without impacting their privacy, both sides win.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to the start, you mentioned that Quokka, or Kryptowire, as they were called back then,
Yeah.
were formed off the back of, I suppose, government grants and research into the new instances of mobile phones being so connected. How do you help, or what are the challenges for governments and also controller environments as well, such as medical apps? I'm thinking my mum had a pacemaker that had controls that went back to the hospital and linked up to her phone. Financial apps. What are you doing there? What's the challenges?
Yeah, there's a couple different things that we're doing. The primary thing we're doing is looking at these apps that are in the App Store that are written by third parties. And what we're able to do is identify, risks, vulnerabilities, issues in those apps. And as I said earlier, I personally have a different level of security posture than, say, a diplomat, right? Or somebody that, like your mom, is relying on that pacemaker app. So we work both directly with the app makers as well as with third parties, companies like Orca that are basically, or similar companies that are, going out and looking at making sure that these medical apps are secure. On the finance side, making sure that the finance apps are secure, and that that they respect your privacy, and that they're not looking at or modifying or leaking access to some of this information. And the other important thing, of course, is again, if you are a journalist, you have a lot of concerns about reporting in certain parts of the world or on certain sensitive topics, and so you have this heightened risk. And a lot of these apps are basically giving away information about all of us. Some of us might care less than others, but for some of us, it's an actual serious thing, right? These apps are talking to third-party systems. We call them ad tech, right? So you're sending pings. You've all heard of, or maybe you've all heard of the term pixel, right? The pixels are dropping in our emails, and now they can track you. Well, mobile has a much different and much broader model for tracking you. So, mobile apps are essentially collecting information and sending it to Meta. They're sending it to Yahoo. They're sending it to Yandex. They're sending it to, Tencent or Byju's or TikTok. And this information is supposed to be anonymized, right? It's just, oh, hey, you're looking at this site, but we don't reveal details about you. But so many studies at this point have shown that it's trivial to de-anonymize users when you have that data in bulk. And
Yeah.
so if you can prevent these apps from talking to these ad tech services and sharing information, you can basically protect yourself. And again, if you're a journalist trying to keep your sources secure, or if you are in the military on a deployment, we've heard stories of military bases being discovered because folks are using their running tracker, which is
I've
sharing your
seen I've
position,
seen
right?
that. What was it called? It's not Strada, something similar. I've
Yeah,
seen
I don't
people.
remember the app itself.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
saw a story a couple of years ago about that. I think
sure.
it was Russian intelligence were actually
It
monitoring some special service agents, I think, in the UK and the US. Yeah, scary, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But think about the average person. So if you are using a period tracking app for, you're trying to get pregnant, if that information is leaking ad hoc. Last year, there's a company called Premom, which settled with the FTC here in the US because they were leaking that data to both Google and also servers in China.
Is this why I
And
keep getting incontinence pads adverts coming up on my, on my
well,
phone? It's my
j-
secret
jokes
pregnancy, isn't it?
but jokes aside, sure, in the military context, you don't want to give away a base location, but for us everyday folks, think of what we're giving away every day. And it's easy to say, yeah, like you said, right? You don't read it, you just say, okay, I want to
Yeah.
use this app. So you have games and you have apps that are tracking your medical information, and all of that is getting aggregated, and then somebody is building a very detailed profile, and you are getting ads for things that you don't want. And where are they getting that? Well, because there are brokers that will collect all that information, compile it together, and then, like I said, if you have so much information, you can very easily sort of deduplicate folks and identify them. And so we do have that concern. And so again, with medical apps, with finance apps, with some of the e-commerce apps, these are things we didn't think of. But because these phones are always looking at your medical history and your buying habits and your location from your running apps, and like I use Samsung Health app, and I have to think, like, who else is getting access to the my sleep schedule, and what can they deduce from it? And so
Oh, you've made me think, because I use my Apple Watch to record the very small amount of exercise that I actually do.
I'm in the same boat.
And recently I've had more and more, it could be a combination of demographic information as well, but more and more online training platforms, we can get you fit. I've had all this stuff coming through since I've been wearing that watch the last 3 months trying to get fit. I need to go through my apps and see who's sharing what with who, perhaps. Or is that not possible as an individual?
It's so painful that none of us do it.
Yeah.
Look, everybody look on your phone and see how many apps you have. Last time I looked, I had over 200. So should I review the
Ooh,
permissions that each app is asking, like
no.
for 200 apps on what,
I
a
might just
weekly
get a new
basis? I
phone.
mean, so I think the average I saw on the sites that track this, it's like 80 apps on a phone is the average. But people have more than that, people have less than that. So bottom line is if there were a way to secure your phone, highlight the apps that do have issues that you should care about, which isn't every app, but it's a few, restrict the permissions of those apps and give that to you in a way that doesn't infringe on your privacy, wouldn't that be a good way both for us as individuals and for those BYOD devices that the enterprise can look at? And the good news is there is such a thing, and that's why we're here. That you asked me why I joined. That's why I joined, because
That's
this is
why.
a problem that is easy. If you're a lawyer and you work for a law firm, yes, there's a lot of secrets that you care about. If you're, me working for a small startup, there's still things I would like to keep private,
Of course.
and my employer
Yeah.
would like me to keep private, and that's something that needs to happen without impacting privacy. That's that privacy thing again. That's the big one.
And the whole working from home has just increased this exponentially, hasn't it? The last what, nearly 4 years now, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm conscious we only had half an hour, and we're on the half an hour point. I've got probably a whole nother show's worth of questions for you. So what I'm going to do is ask you one more because it's one I'm personally interested to the answer for. And then I suggest we reconvene and get you back on in 2 or 3 weeks' time to cover the
Yeah.
rest. Would you be open to
Happy
that?
to. Happy to join.
Perfect.
Happy to answer.
You mentioned the dreaded TikTok word earlier, and I think you said that Quokka were involved in identifying that back in the day. What's going on? Do they need banning? What's the inside track, Ilya? Considering you work for the company who discovered that.
Yeah. So before I got here back in 2018, they discovered that TikTok was sending data to China, which at the time was a big deal. I remember I was actually working at a different company that was testing mobile apps for quality issues. And TikTok was one of the apps we looked at. And it was amazing how much effort they put in to obfuscate what they were really doing, which we didn't look at from a security point of view, but thankfully someone did. But that was 5, 6
Yeah.
years ago, right? And a lot has changed since then. So what we're looking at is now, here in the US, some states have banned it, but honestly, banning TikTok is sort of like taking a sieve and plugging up one of the holes.
Or shutting the gate after the horse has bolted.
Way after.
Maybe is
And
that?
by the way, there's 7 other doors that are part of the stable that are just completely open, and there's no back to this stable. Like the entire stable is just open and connects to a lot of other places, but you're worried about shutting the gate on the front. So
Yeah.
there might be reasons for banning TikTok that I can't answer, but I can tell you this: ByteDance, the parent company, has an SDK, and an SDK is it's a bit of code that developers include because it gives them functionality. So 80+% of games use the ByteDance SDK because it gives them an easy way to monetize gaming. And by the way, there are other companies in China like Tencent, which are also arguably, have at least some control by the military, but it's a commercial company and it has an SDK that you can use. So, the latest research we've looked at is that there are millions and millions and millions of apps on the App Store, which are built on top of the SDK that ByteDance provides or that TikTok provides. So as soon as banning TikTok became a thing, they created an app called Lemonade, which is a totally
Of course
different
they did.
app. It's doing pretty much the same thing. Another thing we did is we looked at the top 10 alternatives to TikTok, and the one that came in as number 2 and number 3, depending on which list you look at, they're using a Tencent SDK to basically, you know how these apps let you put in a filter that does like the funny mustache or the
Yeah,
eyebrows.
yeah.
The way that actually works is programmatically, you as a developer put in this SDK from Tencent, and the SDK's job is to take the picture, figure out where to put the eyebrows, and send it back to you with the eyebrows on it. And this happens 60 times per second in real time, right? So
Wow.
so consider what it means to ban TikTok. It's literally like,
It's a waste of
yeah,
time.
you have like a tiny bit of fence with a gate, and then there's no fence around the rest of the house. It's just the front, it's just decorative, right? And we're arguing whether we should ban, we should like lock up that gate. I mean, there's literally no fence around the rest of the house, and you're talking about
Do
locking
you
the
think
gate.
some of that might be slightly politically motivated though, when it comes to vote winning, seeing as both of our countries have got an election coming up this year, both of which I have no doubt will be farcical and very interesting.
Actually, there's a lot of country. There was an article recently about how many countries are having elections this year and how it's kind of a world history event where so many countries are having so many elections that when you add it all up, it's just fundamentally, changes in human history. But
And it's a good job though, isn't it, that we're not at a
yeah.
point in time where people can electronically manipulate people's thoughts and feelings
Right,
around
yeah,
that.
that's
Right?
good. Did you see the story from Hong Kong, I believe, where the poor VP of finance joins a call with the CFO and
I
some other
did.
colleagues, and everybody on that call was computer generated, right? AI generated. So
Brilliant.
yeah, I mean, banning TikTok is like banning snow in the Antarctic circles. I mean, sure, it's
Although with global warming pressure, never say
yeah,
never.
but politics aside, the governments of different countries are on this bandwagon. So the Home Office and the U.S. government, the Singapore government, other governments, they are looking at this problem more than just, hey, let's ban TikTok. And a lot of work is being put in to really identify what are these different threats from different apps and different devices. And so there is a lot of work being done. So the good news is, politics aside, a lot of good people are putting in a lot of good time into figuring out what these problems are. But as these devices are getting more powerful and they're becoming, more and more a day part of our everyday lives, both professionally and privately, these are real problems. So, laughing about TikTok is one thing, but the reality is TikTok itself is doing a good job of, trying to get with the times, but it's a chicken and egg. It's sorry, actually, it's a cat and mouse game. You never really win. It's just there are more cats, there are more mice, and they have more and more fun. So it's a never ending chase, and we all have to kind of play our part in it.
I've learned so much today. You've made me feel a little bit ignorant, actually,
Go
about
check
how
your
some of these
app
things work.
permissions, see how many of them have access to your
Yeah,
microphone.
I had a quick look when you mentioned, and I've got well over 100. I stopped counting when it got to that point. It is scary. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. Let's get you back on in 2 or 3 weeks to continue the discussions. In the meantime, any words of wisdom to wrap things up to people who are watching? I suppose I should really bring up your QR code. So if anyone wants to find out
Yeah,
any
thank
more
you.
about
Thank you
Quokka,
for that.
come.
My
There we go.
my words of wisdom are very simple, that just keep in mind as you use these devices, who are they talking to and what are they sending, because they know a lot about you. And
Yeah.
just be mindful of that to whatever extent each of us can.
Brilliant. Ilya, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Enjoy the
Simon.
rest of your day. Everyone, thank you for tuning in. Those who haven't tuned in live and have watched on the replay, again, thank you so much. Drop your comments in, drop your questions in, and I'll make sure that when Ilya comes back in a few weeks' time, we'll bring them up and get them addressed. So from me and from Ilya, that's good afternoon and good night, and see you very soon.
See you
Take
soon,
care.
folks. Thanks, Simon. Take care.
Bye. Pleasure.